And welcome to another episode of the If They Can Do It podcast, the podcast that interviews absolutely ordinary people who do extraordinary things and wants you walking away thinking, hey, if they can do it, so can I. And this week, I think this might be a record for the podcast where somebody comes on again and like the shortest distance in between the two times that they come on. But you know what? It's the end of the year. And when I think of all the guests and all the people who I know who could give perspective and have you start your year right, I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm asking her back. I don't care if we just recorded on what feels like last Wednesday. You're getting another dose of Jessica Christie, no chaser. I mean, she's just going to give it to you real. How you doing, Jess?
I'm doing great. How are you, Isaac? It's
I
so
am
great to be
good.
back.
Oh my gosh. You know, when I listened to our episode, I was like, oh my gosh, because you have this conversation and you forget chunks of it that happened. And I was like, that was so good. Like that was just, yeah. So I was excited when you said that you would come back on.
Yeah, absolutely. I had so much fun recording with you and so much fun with our conversation. And I just know that, I just think it's valuable. And I hope that we can do that again for people, And honestly, I learned from you and you learned from me. It's fun to be here and have that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it almost in our conversation that we had last time, we could have had our own little like 4 hour long, like Joe Rogan episode with how long we actually talked
Yeah,
that day.
exactly.
Because it was like, all right, podcast now, like, so what's going on? And it was
I
like,
know.
we talked forever and it was so good. And that's just part of catching up with old friends,
Yeah, I love it. I
And
love it. I appreciate you.
so we're just gonna keep the party going.
Do it
And,
again.
as we come into the new year, everybody gets in that, new year, new me. And what made me think about this was I was at the gym earlier this week, and one of the coaches there was like, hey, y'all, like, you're my regulars. You're like all this. You're here all the time, but make sure you sign up for the classes early because we're about to get into the part where like
Yeah.
everybody's doing their new year thing and it's going to be full for the next couple months. So just make sure you get your spot. So then that way the people who will be here consistently for a week or two will kind of come in and you'll still have your spot. And so with that in mind, I was like, you know what? Let's have a talk. Let's have a talk about setting goals, about how we approach New Year's, about our relationship with setting goals. Because I'll be honest, like I'm 40 and I've set a lot of goals and have maybe accomplished, I don't know, I could probably count it on like one hand how many I've like written down and saw through to the very end. I know we talked a lot about your goals in the last one. And you were like, hey, I wanted to be a full-time photographer, so I quit. And if I wanted to eat, I better be shooting and taking
Exactly.
pictures. And so you were talking, your method is just jump in and just get it done. Get it done. Cash the checks, make sure you get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny that you say that because yes, I have always felt like that is kind of how I've lived my life in this method of just deciding and jumping in head first and doing it. But actually I've kind of learned as hindsight, looking back at my life, I'm kind of maybe I was more intentional than I realized, maybe unconsciously intentional, if that even makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think that there was more intentionality behind it than I even recognized. And that's what kind of has now evolved into the way I coach with people because it's kind of been eye opening to look back. And that actually started for me when I was cleaning out stuff in my old place in Denver before I moved to Southern California. And I found a list that I had written of goals, surprisingly.
Wow.
And I had written this list, I want to say it was maybe 2007 or 2008. It was on the cusp of graduating high school, starting college. And when I found the list a decade later, I'm looking at the list and I was reading all the things on the list and I had actually done all of them.
That's cool.
There were I want to say there were probably between 15 and 20 things on this list. And I had done all of them, all the way from living in France to getting a dog, to moving, all the things that I had wanted to do. I had done them. And I was like, what the
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I can't believe that because I forgot the list existed. And so I do think there was some intentionality behind it that I didn't know. And now what I'm trying to do with that is I'm actually trying to harness it more consciously as opposed to unconsciously, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. When you wrote it down, like, do you remember when you wrote it down? Like, can you put yourself in do you remember when you wrote down those goals? You're like, oh,
Yeah,
shoot, here's a goal list.
I was sitting on my bedroom floor, like at my parents' house.
Did you really think they were going to happen? Like, what was your mindset when you were writing them?
So in the moment, like, I don't know that I was consciously thinking to myself, like, yes, this is going to happen for sure. But clearly, something subconsciously in me fully believed that I was going to do those things because if I didn't believe it, then it wouldn't have happened. Because I really truly believe that what we subconsciously believe, what we think on a regular basis, what is playing as our dominant thought, that's what's going to be showing up in our reality. So I think because I had like written these things down and then they were tucked away in my subconscious, and then I truly embodied the person that already was doing those things. Like I truly believe subconsciously deep down that I could, the opportunities came up, you know. It's like it was easy for me to see the opportunities. Like for example, living in France, like when I wanted to live in France, I was quitting my full-time job to do my photography business full time, and I had posted on Facebook like, I think a 3-month stay in France is in order. And I had met a girl, one of my very dear friends now, Lorraine. I had met her in France the year before when I just took a vacation there. And she commented on it and she's like, yes, you should come. So I reached out to her and I was like, hey, do you know of anywhere I could possibly like live and like how much it would cost? And she says to me in English, she's like, come stay with us. And so I was like, wait a minute. Let me put this in French to make sure there's no like language barrier
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
So I put it
Wait,
in
do you speak
French.
French?
Oui, je parle un peu de français.
Okay. I mean, either I have bad internet or you were speaking French or you were breaking up.
Yes, I
All
speak a
right.
little
That's
bit of French.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
I minored in it in college, and I've been
Oh,
going back to France ever since I lived there. I've been going back every year. Sometimes I go for, a few weeks at a time. Sometimes it's a quick trip, but I go back and see my friends there all the time. They're like my family, my French family away from home. Like I
yeah.
love them. And I consider Marseille, France like my home away from home now because I lived there. Well, I lived in Paris, but my friends are from Marseille. So yeah, so I put it in French. I was like, hey, seriously, are you sure? Like how much money do you want? Like how much can I pay you? Because the funny thing about this is my friend and her now husband, like they lived in a tiny apartment
Yeah.
in Paris. Like it wasn't like they had a guest bedroom. Like she was basically like saying, come live on our couch in this tiny apartment for months. And
Yeah.
I was just like, are you sure? And then when I asked her, like, how much money do you want? She was like, nothing. And I was like, no, 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 seriously. Again, wrote it in French. And she's like, no, 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 just come. And like, I think that had my mindset been, this is not possible for me, it's not possible for me to live in France, it's not possible for me to leave the United States. Like, if I had that mindset in my head, I don't think that opportunity would have ever presented itself, nor would I have even sought out the opportunity. Like, I just
Yeah.
wouldn't have been able to see it, you know?
Yeah.
And so thankfully, lucky for me, because I believed truly deep down that not only could I go live in France, but that I also deserved to live in France. Like this is an
Hmm.
opportunity that I'm allowed to have in my life. Like it's something that I'm allowed to do, and that I could do. The opportunity presented itself, and I was very fortunate to have this show up. And now one of my best friends in the whole world, I got to live with her, and now I've watched her get married and have her kids, and like, and I have other friends there now that I don't know, it's just made my life so much more magical because I just believed I could. So that's kind of the
That's
approach.
crazy. That's crazy. That's crazy. So now, and we were talking about this before we hit record. So now I'm sure you're a big believer in goals and you're like, write down your goals. Let's do New Year's resolution. You're all about it or no?
No, no, not at all. Okay, so I don't know like the exact like statistic, but like New Year's resolutions, I think it's like 8%, only 8% of them actually like, and you can fact check me on that. I don't really know for sure, but it's not a lot. Like not very many people actually fulfill their New Year's resolutions. I think a lot of times people are like, okay, I need to make these goals, and they try to set these goals because they think I think there's something about themselves or their life that they need to fix, right? Like, I need to fix this, I need to change this. And a lot of times they focus on these external things like, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to try to, like, read a book every day or every month, or like something like that. Like, they try to fixate on these like external goals when the reality is their mindset hasn't shifted, right? So for them to become the person they want to be, without shifting their mindset, those goals are going to fall flat. And that's why most people don't actually succeed with them. So for me, it's like, I don't really care so much what your goal is. I care about what your belief of yourself is. What is your self concept? Like, what do you think that you're capable of? And that's where the goals should come from, in my opinion.
Hmm. Do you, and this is just, I'm thinking about that process of like you finding the list of goals and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Are you a people pleaser?
Yeah, for sure. I have been
Are you,
notoriously.
okay. All right. Yeah. Cause the reason why I asked that is if I were, I'm thinking like, okay, if I were to like look in a journal and I were to find a list on the, like a list of goals, I'm like 90% sure that if I were to look at the list of goals, I wouldn't have a reaction of like, ooh, I did that. I did not do that, like in terms of meeting or not meeting the goals. I'm almost 100% sure I would look at the list and go, well, I really didn't want that. Like
Interesting.
that's not something I really wanted. That at the time is what I thought I was supposed to be. And so I set
Hmm.
it as a goal. And the closer I got to what I thought I was supposed to be, or something that I thought would make me feel better about myself, then everything would be okay. There.
Yes.
And so like that my relationship with goals has been a lot of, you brought it up, like thinking that you're worthy enough, like somebody who has this thing, the goal, would
Hmm.
be worthy to be treated a certain way. And so I was less
Yep.
attached to the goal and more attached to like
The
how
feeling.
I would be treated if I met it, because I'm a people pleaser.
Yeah.
And that for me soured me a ton
Yeah.
on goals, but also because my identity was, if I change, I need to not be myself and become this thing that's a goal, right? The more that I didn't get the goals, the more that I'm like, well, I guess this is myself. You can't like really not be yourself. So myself is this person who, I don't necessarily like, but I'm really good at making other people like, because of my energy. I am like charismatic and can lead like groups and stuff like that. So maybe that's just what I do, even though it didn't fulfill me. Like there
Yeah.
was still a hole, if that makes sense.
That makes so much sense. I think a lot of times people make goals out of the need to get external validation, for sure. And they make these goals because they think they should be living a certain way. And then once they're living a certain way, then they can be happy. Then they can feel good enough. Then they can feel, you know, like happy with themselves and all of that. And we all do it. I mean, you do it, I do it. We all do it. This is kind of like, unfortunately, like the way our culture is kind of set up in this. Well, once you do X, Y, and Z, then you've made it, when the reality is that is so unfulfilling. And that is just actually, like, as you set these goals from a place of, I'm not good enough, so I need to do these goals so that way I am good enough, right? I need to succeed in these goals so that way I feel good about myself and I feel happy and I feel loved and I feel enough. Once you set goals from that place, you're not setting them for you. You're setting them for everyone else. So you're setting it up for the way you want to appear to the world. And it's very unfulfilling, and it perpetuates the cycle. Because
Hmm.
most of the time, if you're setting the goal from that place, you most likely won't achieve it. And if you do achieve it, you won't feel good about it in the end. It won't give you that sense of fulfillment. And so then it perpetuates that belief of like, yep, well, I'm not good enough because I didn't do it, or I didn't get the feeling I thought I was going to get. I don't understand. I did the thing, but like, why don't I feel good? Like, I thought I'd feel differently, because it's still not the internal shift. And so once you start making that internal shift and deciding who you want to be in the world, deciding who you actually are, and not letting external factors influence that, like you getting to know yourself and trusting yourself because you know you better than anyone, that gives you so much clarity. Like, you have so much clarity about who you are, and then it's easy. because then it's like the goals just fall in your lap. You don't actually have to like strive to prove something. You're actually just existing and trusting you. And then the goals just kind of fall to you because you have that clarity and that trust in yourself, that faith.
Yeah. Yeah, when you were talking about like getting the goal and achieving the goal and then being like, wait, this was supposed to feel different. I think about like, not only is there the sense of disappointment, right? Because like, let's say I'll just use something simple, like that's going to be a lot of people's goals, like weight loss
Yeah.
and health, right?
Right. Yeah.
And let's say somebody does, like they lose 120 pounds, 150 pounds. They look completely different. But because like getting to that number was supposed to fulfill them, the worst thing that can happen for that person sometimes is getting their goal and recognizing that there's no there there,
Yeah.
because there's bitterness, there's resentment. It's like, wait a second, I still feel like I still do not like the person that I see in the mirror. I still am self-conscious. I still am insecure. And not only is there the fact that I'm angry that that still exists, but it still exists after I made all of this sacrifice when I didn't go out and have pizza with my friends and beers because I needed to lose the weight. I said no to all these things, and
Yeah.
and I still feel the same way. And in some ways that is absolutely understandable when people go
Yeah.
on a weight yo-yo, because they lose all the weight and they still feel the same. And it's like, well, screw it. Like, and it's completely understandable in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, and I'll share this, this is a little vulnerable, but I really struggled with body dysmorphia. I grew up doing ballet. So obviously, when
Oh
you
yeah.
are having your body critiqued, I did it for 15 years, So when you're constantly looking in the mirror, having your body critiqued and wanting to look a certain way, like I had girls passing out in our ballet classes because they weren't eating. So you learn, especially at that age, like you learn to look at your body that way, right? And so as I got older and wasn't doing ballet and wasn't as active as I had been, as you get older, your metabolism slows down, start I start becoming a woman. Like my body shifts and changes. Like I can't eat whatever I want
Yeah.
anymore. And I really struggled with it a lot. And I want to say it was like almost 7 years ago now, 8 years ago. I was never diagnosed, but I was basically anorexic. Like, and I was the thinnest I'd ever been. I was so, 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 so skinny. Like, even my sister made comments to me about it, but I still looked in the mirror despite being so thin. I still looked in the mirror and hated what I saw. I still thought I was fat. I still hated my stomach. I still hated myself so much. And it was really it's quite painful actually. And ever since then I've gone on this big journey of trying to heal. And because shortly 2 years after that happened, I broke my ankle that year, gained weight back, all of the things. And then 2 years after that was the pandemic, and that's when I went through like a big realization of like, oh, I hate myself. Like, this isn't just about my body, this is me hating myself because I went through a really bad breakup. I lost 60% of my business as a photographer at the time. And I lost everything that I was using to define myself, to identify myself with. And I looked in the mirror and I hated myself. And so I kind of went to this place of like, okay, I got to figure out how to love myself again. And I can very proudly and successfully say, like, while it's not perfect every day, I do. And that has shifted so much. Like when I look in the mirror, I don't have those thoughts anymore. But that's why the mindset has to shift. Like I had to get to a place of feeling like I am enough, I am whole, I am worthy, I am chosen, I am loved. Like I've got me. Like, because I didn't believe any of those things. Like my therapist said to me so many sessions, he was like, sounds like you feel like you're not chosen again. Sounds like you feel like you're not chosen. And I was like,
You're like, that phrase is becoming very expensive for me.
yeah, he was literally like repeating my limiting beliefs back to me over and
Yeah.
over and over again. And it finally all clicked. And I was like, I have to choose myself, like not eating and looking in the mirror and nitpicking my body. I'm not choosing myself. Like I'm hating on myself. And oh, something just fell. I'm so sorry.
You're all good. You're all good.
Anyways, yes. So it took me shifting my mindset, and now I have a much healthier relationship with my body and food and things like that. So, and you hear stories too about, people that might have, some sort of you know, disformity or abnormality with their body and they, get it fixed. Like, maybe something as simple as like somebody has like a cleft lip or whatever, and they
Hmm.
like get, something fixed, but they still continue to go through their life hating themselves, because they didn't change here. You can fix the external all you want, but until you change the internal, it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah, and like, and some of it isn't even a person's fault. It's literally, and I think you brought it up in our last conversation, like the neural pathways are done, in terms
Yeah.
of like what you're thinking in your brain. There was a study done that essentially said most of the thoughts that we have are an overwhelming majority of the thoughts that we have are repeated thoughts, and then like 80% of those repeated thoughts are negative. And that's not necessarily bad. Like they think about danger, like you're thinking, oh, is that car slowing down? Oh, like
Right.
some of it's like that, but other things are narratives about ourselves. And it's just like water going downhill. Like those neural pathways are going to take the path of least resistance that's been worn already, and gravity's just going to pull it. And so you have to consciously kind of reroute the water to go a different direction, because it's not going to go that way. Just psychologically and scientifically, it's not going to go that way. That has nothing to do with will. That has nothing to do with persistence, anything like that. It's literally reframing, using different language around the way that you perceive things. If you don't do that as you're making changes to tell yourself these stories, it's not going to be what you want it to be.
No, yeah. And so a lot of times what I do with my clients, like in my like 2-month like coaching program that I have, the first month is literally spent like figuring out what those stories are. Like what is your self-concept? Like what do you believe? What is that 80% that you're repeating over and over and over consciously? Because we're on autopilot most of the time. Like that's how we drive cars. Like you don't get in your car and think like, okay, I need to turn this on and then I need to turn the lights on. You don't do that. It's autopilot because you've programmed those
I
neural
feel
pathways in
attacked.
your
I feel
brain.
attacked. I have not driven like 50 miles down the interstate on a road trip and like been like, what just happened? I don't know how
Where
I got
how did I get here?
Yeah, exactly.
But that's like the evidence of wiring those neural pathways. That's the evidence of it. Like, we do, it's important for that to happen, but we also have the power and the ability to rewire them. So I spend like the first month with my clients, like trying to figure out what the story is. And then I spend the second month with them trying to rewire that, trying to reframe that. And we can use several different techniques to do that, whether it's meditation, affirmations, journaling, whatever it might be. But when you start to do it, and this is why also probably a lot of resolutions or goals maybe people don't succeed at, is because when you start trying to reframe that, the old you is going to kick and scream. Like that old story, that's your comfort zone. Even if that comfortable space isn't healthy for you, like even if in your brain you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't keep eating a pint of ice cream every night, like I know I can't do that, like I know that's not healthy for me, like, but for some reason, that's your comfort, you're used to that, and so you'll fall into it. I mean, it's the same thing when you see repeated cycles in your life, and I often ask my clients about this too, like where have you seen repetition? For me, it was in relationships. I saw a lot of repetition in relationships. And I was like, what is happening? It's like the same situation, just with a different person. Like, I'm never chosen. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I was constantly cheated on, like, and it was like, oh, because I have a underlying belief that I'm not chosen. So I need to rewire that. But it was definitely this place of like, it was kicking and screaming of like, no, 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 this is our comfort zone. This feels good. That old familiar, even though it's not healthy, it feels good.
Yeah.
And so it feels uncomfortable to start rewiring because you're not used to it. And you also don't know the outcome. The cool thing about our brains and about just human existence is we want to protect ourselves, right? We're trying to protect ourselves, and B, we want to prove ourselves right. We don't want to be wrong, you know?
Yeah.
So if I
Even if
know,
it's wrong about you thinking you're crap, like
yeah,
we don't like
yeah,
being wrong.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
if I believe I'm not chosen, and then I enter into a new relationship with that underlying belief subconsciously that I'm not chosen, I might say things, do things. Like my ex, for example, like 2 months in was like, I feel like you're just like waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I was like, what do you mean? No. Yes, of course, because I'm not chosen,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah,
And the demise of that relationship was, yes, him leaving me for someone else,
yeah,
thus proving my belief true, right? Because I was acting and showing up in ways in that relationship that solidified that belief for me.
yeah.
And so
Yeah,
it's just this
is that
vicious
interesting?
cycle.
And then when somebody who believes they're not chosen meets up with somebody who believes that they're a screw up, or like they've been nitpicked all their life, then they're going to be like, "Well, fine, if you think I'm going to, then
Then I'll just do it.
screw up's gonna screw up, like duck's gonna quack. That's what we do, kind of a thing. And then just people end up getting hurt. And then the other thing, when we talk about pathways too, I've also seen in working with people that like there are good patterns in their lives that are ignored because one story is stronger than the other. So like, for example, I had a one-on-one with one of my bosses at work, and I like all my strengths. Is like, what are your top strengths? What are your top opportunities? Like all that kind of stuff. And one of my opportunities was being action oriented, and he had the courage to be like, okay, Isaac, like action oriented. I'm gonna have to call bullshit on this one. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he goes, I can think of 5 times where the team has needed you to act and you were proactive in like helping that thing. And so the fact that you're not recognizing this, like what we would say, he didn't say this, but what we're talking about, the fact that I wasn't recognizing that pattern means that I wasn't consciously leveraging it, and I was missing opportunities to actually make my life better, because this thing that was a strength, I'm not leaning into when I see that it's needed, because I'm just ignoring that pattern, right? And then
Yeah.
I'm like, gosh, dang it. So then I started thinking like, when people ask me for help, when do they normally ask me for help for things? And then I started seeing trends in there, and I'm like, wait, there's a strength in there somewhere. Like there's something that I'm good at, that when people, out of all the people they know, that I get the same question every single time, that people come to me for that thing, and I need to listen to those patterns as much as I need to identify the ones that need to be let go too.
100%. And that's why, like, the second part of my coaching program, I work on solidifying those, right?
See,
So,
and I
yes,
didn't
we're
see this is it. This wasn't even before. We didn't like plan this at all. She was, that's just like the first, but and which leads to the second. This isn't even planned. This isn't even planned at all. I'm like, okay, all right, all right. I'm like, now I'm gonna be in my head. I'm like, what would be the third thing? Okay, now stop and then start listening. What would logically be?
I mean, it really is a very logical process though, you know? It's like it's for example, like, you know, I feel like a lot of people like want to manifest, right? Manifestation is basically just like goal setting, right? Like manifestation is essentially prayer. Like it's all the same. Like it doesn't matter what you believe, whether you're setting goals, manifesting or praying. It's all trying to move the needle, right? You're trying to go from here to here. And so a lot of times people will be praying for something or trying to manifest something or trying to achieve this goal, but until they like start that rewire, that thing is not going to show up. That thing is
Yeah,
not going to happen because they don't believe it, right? Like, you know, religion, spiritual teachers, like even like very like non-religious, like life coaches and
hmm,
therapists and motivational speakers, like they talk about faith. Like
hmm,
it's so important for you to have faith, and you have to have faith in something, you know, like, you know, yourself or whatever that's going to tell you that it's possible, you know? So yeah, like, you know, we if we the awareness is one thing. I think I did say this in the last episode. The awareness is one thing, but like what are you going to do with it, right? Like you can have the awareness, but it's like now that you know, like after you had this one-on-one with your boss and you drew awareness to this, okay, cool. What are you going to do with that? How are you going to rewire and start paying attention to that belief and
yeah,
see it more and more, you
yeah.
know?
Well, and after that, I recognize it like, oh yeah, I am super action oriented. Like if Kendra tells me a problem, I'm like, don't tell me to
Yeah.
do something unless like you're ready for me to go right then. And so that's when I'm like, hey, I'm thinking we should do like A, B, and C. Kendra knows not to answer me
Yeah.
or say
Yeah.
yes or no, or that's a good idea or bad idea, because she knows that if she says yes, I already have a plan for it and I'm ready to go for it, you know? So I'm like, oh
Yeah.
geez, I am super action oriented. And then now I am leveraging that more. And
Yeah.
I'm in Texas with a promotion at work and like
I
all that
love
kind of
it.
stuff, right? Like, and it's not because I'm special in any sort of way or that anything has changed. It's just me realizing, and I'm not a car person, so don't make fun of me, listeners, that I'm using this car as an example, okay? But I just recognized, oh, I'm driving a Prius and I'm just recognizing the other Priuses that were on the road. There's nothing in my thoughts that made Priuses appear. It's just the fact that I'm identifying now with the Priuses that were always on the road, and I'm
Mhm.
recognizing, I'm identifying with them. So if they're an opportunity, I'm now identifying that that's an opportunity for me
Yeah.
there because I have something, yes, that's, we have that in common, right? And I can definitely step into that opportunity. And so, you know, I think people think of prayer, manifestation, whatever, as in like, oh, just kind of making something appear out of thin air. It's like, no, it's being able to identify things that were always there that you would have overlooked. Because I say this a lot on this podcast, you find what you're looking for, and it is just reminding yourself what to be looking as it relates to your
Exactly.
priorities.
Exactly. And that's kind of why I feel like resolutions, goal setting in a sense is a little bit of BS
Cool. I thought you
because
were going
it's
to say
like,
that was the third part. I was like, stop.
no, no. The third part is truly honestly just deciding. It's what you just talked about, right? It's okay, well now that I recognize this belief that was holding me back, and now I'm going to shift the belief into a belief that actually is going to get me closer and I have more clarity about who I actually am. And it's kind of like you wake up and you decide that you're going to like switch into this avatar. Like if
Mhm.
you're playing like a video game, right? Like you
Yeah.
switch to avatar. So it's like, you wake up one day and you're like, man, I'm so sick and tired of being this person that it feels stuck, that isn't going anywhere, that's unhappy, that's feeling unfulfilled, like all of these things, all right? And you're just like, I'm finally so sick of it. And you just like every morning when you wake up, you choose the other avatar where it's like, no, 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 like I am fulfilled. I'm amazing. I can achieve these things. I do deserve it. I am worthy, right? And shifting into that avatar, but it takes a daily choice. So like that's the next step is the consistency. It's persistence
Mhm.
because that's the other piece of it that is so often missed when you're setting goals or when you're trying to manifest or praying for something is you don't persist because it doesn't show up right away or it doesn't happen right away or it feels hard and when that friction comes up, remember I said the old you is going to want to kick and scream, right? So that's why you experience that friction of like but I prayed for it, but I tried to manifest it. I did all the things. I did the things. Like why isn't it here? Like why isn't it happening? Like why is it hard? Shouldn't it be easier? Right? And then you start to spiral and you're like, well, I never felt good enough anyways.
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
give up, right? But it's the consistency and persisting through that that actually gets you to the other side of it, right? Because once you persist in the new belief of like I am worthy, I am whole, I do deserve this, like whatever it is, whatever however you're rewiring, persisting in that belief is what is actually going to get you there. And when I first started coaching, I actually did not usually see my clients through this part because I had not learned yet that for myself. And I had not learned that I needed to hold that space for my clients because sometimes in
Mhm.
that persistence phase, you need that accountability. You need somebody to be like, no, 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 don't go back to that old you. Don't go back to that old story. And so, now I obviously sit with my clients longer and stay with them longer because I want to make sure we're building the habit because whatever you think is going to create your actions, which is going to create your habits, which is going to create your life. So, you got to pay attention to that.
I love I love that. I love that. Now, what you were saying before I had interrupted you, which is why you don't like the idea of goals.
Yeah,
So
because go ahead. Sorry.
so like because what you were talking about just now was like, okay, your habits, your behaviors, they all stack up, and what you have right now is essentially an accumulation of all the habits and behaviors to this point. Kind of walk through that process and how that process has led you to be against setting like goals or New Year's resolutions for the top of the year.
So, it's honestly kind of a summarization, I guess, of everything we've talked about. But let's say that you have a dominant belief, and maybe this is a belief that's on autopilot. You might not know that it exists in there, like, because, you know, we're not always aware all the time, like, so let's say you have a belief that you're not good enough, for example, right? So if that is like a subconscious belief that you have, a mindset that you have, and that has been wired into your neural pathways, and it came from, I don't know, something in your childhood or something that happened to you that made you feel not good enough. And so that's a belief that you then held on to. So you then start going about your life. And so let's say you get a job and you're like, okay, I'm excited about this job, and you're starting to try to do things in this job, but you feel like you're not good enough, right? If you're feeling like you're not good enough, you might not be the person that's as proactive, right? Like, say the boss is
Hmm.
like, hey, we need somebody to do X, Y, and Z, but you don't feel good enough. You might not go for the opportunity
Hmm.
because you don't feel good enough. Or you might notice that you feel overlooked. Or if your boss comes in to give you, like, a critique to help you improve, you might be like, see, I'm not good enough. And then it starts to weigh on you. And so your actions then that you are doing in your job are actually hindering you because you're not being proactive. You don't feel confident. You don't speak up. You don't ask for what you need. You take criticism harshly and personally and let it tear you down. And next thing you know, your friend is getting promoted and not you. And you're like, what the F?
Hmm.
So then it spirals into, it creates your life. Everything that exists, it creates your whole life. And this could also be bleeding over into relationships and all the other things, like how you take care of your health, your body. So if you rewire that, you'll start showing up differently. You'll have different actions, which will create different habits, which will create a different life. And the reason that I don't love goals is because a lot of times people are setting the goals from the old mindset of, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
goal they're setting is, okay, well, I'm going to start going to the gym 3 days a week as soon as the new year is here, when it's here, and I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to be good enough then.
Hmm.
Okay, cool. I'm going to look for a new job because this job is tearing me down. And as soon as I find the new job is going to show me that I'm good enough. They're setting goals from a place of that, as opposed to rewiring it and getting to a place where they truly innately believe I am good enough. Because when you believe that, you're making goals from a place of clarity, of a place of knowing who you are rather than a place of fear,
Yeah.
because that limiting belief is always out of fear.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, as you're talking, I just begin to think, yeah, if you're setting goals and if your motivation for changing is because you hate yourself and you want to get away and you want to fix hating yourself, that starting a goal from there is always going to lead from disappointment because you are going to be you. If you make your goals from the perspective that who you are now is essential to who you are becoming, and that everything leading up to now is an essential part of your story, you don't get to delete chapters from your book. And sometimes it's your fault and sometimes it's not. And sometimes people have horrible things that have happened to them that just frankly should not have happened. But here we are in the chapter. Here we are in the chapter, and this chapter is essential to moving forward. Then that means that the person you are right now is essential to the person you're becoming. And the person you're becoming can't exist without you now. And that gives you a sense of, okay, this person, I may not like the fact that maybe I'm in debt. I may not like the fact that I am, 150 pounds overweight, but I have to be 150 pounds overweight in order to not be 150 pounds overweight and have that be part of my story. And so if I'm setting a goal saying this is going to be part of my story, I need to be grateful, because if I only weighed 150 pounds, that can't be part of my story. And the goal is saying that I want it to be part of my story. And so, cool. Cool. Yep.
Yeah.
This is what's in my hand right now. These are the raw materials I have to write my story. We are all given different raw materials. And as soon as we may, I can't call it anything else. As soon as we make the choice to stop hating what's in our hand and wish that we had different raw materials, then we can go, okay, here's the rules of the game that I have to play with. I am in debt. I am, relationships aren't blah, 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 whatever that thing is, making an assessment of there, going, here's what I have. Okay. What from here? What's the next step I can take? And some of the stories that we tell ourselves, and this is I've learned in my life, some of the stories that we've told ourselves, nobody has done to us. We've just told ourselves. So for example, and I'm not sure if I told this story before, but it bugged me. It was around, I forget if it was around mine and Kendra's anniversary or not. I think it was. And it bothered me because I asked myself, if somebody were to ask Kendra what she thinks of her husband, do I know what she would answer? Like specifically, do I know what she would answer? And that seemed like such a fundamental question, like in a marriage or in a relationship, that it bothered me that I didn't know. And then I asked, okay, but what do I tell myself on a daily basis is the answer to that question. And I was like, whoa, I do not like that, because I would not like to be married to somebody if I thought that of them. So I asked her, and I told her the backstory. This really bugs me. Like, and I've never asked you this. Like, what do you, what do you think of me? And I was not expecting this answer, but she told me, listen, I admire you so much because we both work from home. And she's like, I hear you in that room getting yelled at by customers. And I know that you would rather be doing something else. But I also know that like you were doing that for us and that you show up every day to do that. So when I hear that, I admire that you are willing to do that for right now, because I know it's not going to be forever, but it just really makes me admire you. And I had no reference. I that would have never in my wildest dreams,
because you thought
been
differently.
part of the answer. Yeah, been part of the answer.
Yeah.
Right. And then I realized, whoa, how long have I thought something else and have been trying to like be something. Right. And it really shook me. So like that was one step where I'm like, if I'm completely writing a story in my head that somebody didn't tell me, but I think that I think that they think that about me, and there's a relationship there, I need to go like just straight up ask them it, because it'll rewrite it for me.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, do you feel like with the story that you had prior to asking Kendra, like the story, because it sounds like the story that you had of yourself as a husband wasn't that great.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you find that having that story impacted the way you actually showed up in your marriage?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It was playing a lot of defense, like
Yeah.
a ton of defense. Like, how do I not make her mad? How do
Yeah.
I not make her, like all of those sorts of things? And
Yep.
that was dictating my actions.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be married to be like, okay, all right, how do I not make you mad? Are you okay? Like, I
Yeah.
like all of that kind of, and it wasn't like that, but it was like that, if that makes
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
And then if I did something, because in any relationship, you do things to make people mad. If I did do something to legitimately make her mad, I'm like, well, this is the way you always are. And that's not true,
Yeah.
and it just starts that whole thing.
Exactly. And I think that's so important to see. So I am of the belief, like for me and the way I work with my clients is and for my own life, like I've done this personally. Like this isn't just like me trying to get other people to do it because it's like, oh, gonna help. No, this is like legitimate. Like I've done this for myself. It's taking accountability of the story because I firmly believe and have seen in my life that that story that I tell myself, whatever I believe about myself, is what impacts my relationships. So, for example, when my ex and I broke up, like I was all mad at him. I was like, can you believe he did this? He cheated. He left me for somebody else. Like, can you believe it? Blah, blah. And I wanted to point the finger, like I wanted to be like, you did this, you did this, you did this. And then, as I've dated since then, like looking back on these things, like, well, I guess that's just how these guys are, like, and I had this story of just like men that was just not great. And so when I would enter into anything, it was always, let me ask all the questions to find out how terrible they are
Yeah.
before I get hurt.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to go out with somebody like that, And then that also came from a place of I'm not chosen, I'm not good enough, and I was very insecure. Nobody wants that either, right? So taking accountability of that story, I'm a firm believer that that story creates my reality.
Mm-hmm.
You're the only one in control Like, it's not what somebody does to you. Like, yes, of course, my ex left and cheated and left with somebody else. Okay, cool. Like, I can sit here and be mad at him, or I can take accountability for the fact that I contributed to that because I had the belief that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't chosen, that all men suck.
Mhm.
So, of course, that's what I'm going to get reflected back to me in my reality. So, take accountability of that and shift it. So from your perspective and your story of like, okay, I didn't believe very good things about myself as a husband and it was affecting and how I showed up in the marriage with Kendra. Like then once you started shifting the belief of who you are as a husband, I'm sure that shifted the dynamic in your marriage.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely because people are complex, it was definitely easier to shift in some places other than
Yes, of
others,
course.
you
Yeah.
know, like all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it did. It did. So how are you approaching the new year then for you? Because this will be the first full year of coaching, right? For
Yeah.
you. And I mean, just like personally, you know, looking at the new year. So if you're not making goals, how it is the new year an opportunity to reset for you? How do you view that for you then?
So for me, actually, usually it's more around my birthday, which coincidentally is at the beginning of
Uh,
December. So it kind of is like a New Year thing as well. But I think for me, when I approach like, my birthday, approach the end of the year, I always get really reflective. I do look back at the year and I look back and see, how I showed up, what I did, what I accomplished, what I didn't accomplish. But I think more so than anything this year specifically, as I have dug into my own self concept and have taken that accountability, I'm starting to look at areas in which I have played the victim and didn't take accountability. And I'm like, okay, how can I take accountability there? How can I stop playing the victim? How can I show up differently for myself? And I've been shifting the focus opposed to trying to get like, of course, I want my coaching business to be successful and to grow. And I have these ideas in my head and things that I'm meditating on and things that I'm reflecting on and journaling about because I do believe in getting it out, getting it on paper, getting it out of you,
yeah.
record a voice note. Like, envision your life, visualize it. Like I do that regularly. I do that. I just don't want it to be like this one time thing that you do at the end of the year. Like it needs to be
Yeah.
something that you're
Yeah.
always doing. It's a lifestyle change. Just like when you're trying to get healthy physically, we're now working on your mental diet, right? And so I'm approaching the new year from that standpoint of like, okay, let me look at the end of this year and then how can I continue to show up with that accountability, continuing to shift the mindset and the story for myself. So that way my actions end up being reflective of who I say I want to be, not who I have been. That's kind of how I approach it. And of course, like I said, I do the journaling and the meditating and the visualization. I do that regularly. So it's not a new year, new me kind of thing. It's always like, no, I'm always evolving. I'm always growing. I'm always stepping into that avatar of the woman that I'm choosing to be. And I think for me personally, this was the first year when my birthday approached where I was like, why instead of like looking up to these people that like, oh wow, they're so amazing, like look at what they're doing with their life, look at what they've accomplished, blah 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 blah. How old are they? Are they the same age as me? Like, like instead of doing that, why don't I just freaking become the woman that I
Yeah.
look up to?
Yeah.
Like, why don't I just be her?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm kind of approaching my whole life like that now instead of a goal setting New Year's thing.
Yeah. No, I really like that. And it's super practical and I can't think of another word for it, but like it's light. It's
Yeah.
doable.
Yes.
And the hard part is because it's light, it requires a persistence, but it's if we're going to use the losing weight, thing, if you want to build endurance, you don't lift heavy weights for long periods of time because you can't lift heavy weights for long periods of time. You lift light weights for more reps in order to do it. And so it might not look as impressive doing a 10-pound barbell for 20 reps, but you're teaching your muscles how to hold weight for longer periods of time, which when we're talking about life is ultimately what you need to do. And so I kind of approach this, and I know we've talked about like the gym and healthiness, but this is probably mean to do, but I picture it as a cookie jar, right? And so every day, if you have pieces of evidence in your mind that you're a screw up or you're like these bad stories,
Yeah.
then your goal for the day is to make little decisions that will serve as little cookies that you can go in and put in the cookie jar so that when you start to question, you have these little pieces of evidence that are irrefutable because they happened, right? Like it is a daily version of what my boss did for me, giving me the 5 instances that was like, he gave me 5 cookies and pretty much like shoved them down my throat, right?
Yeah.
To be like,
Yeah.
no, here it is. But now you could for yourself just pick up these little pieces of evidence every single day to go, wait, no, you know what? I actually am a parent who's doing their best, right? I am, I am a husband, a wife, whatever, an entrepreneur who is doing their best and making good decisions. And then when you mess up, it's not about whether or not you're good or bad. It just becomes part of the process. And then
Information.
asking for help from somebody who's done it before becomes the cookie then. I learned I'm one step closer to it because I was making this wrong move and now I know the right move. And so now I'm going in the right direction. For me, it's more about, am I taking little steps to move me in the right direction versus going to the end of the trip and going, if I don't get there tomorrow, or even in a longer period of time, if I don't get there, then all of a sudden I'm not worth anything.
Yeah, like recently I just told a client, I was like, 1 minute. I just need you to give 1 minute of your day, like one, to visualizing this version of you that you already actually are, right? Like, so that way you know it exists. Like, so you can see the cookie, because a lot of times we live in the past. So we need to see the future. And the cool thing is when you start shifting the mindset around it, you stop becoming a person of your past and you start being a person that's living for your future, living for the version of you that you get to choose every single day. And that's when life becomes really beautiful.
Yeah. It's living for your future and recognizing that the present is important to it. And the person that you are right now is the main character of that.
Exactly.
To do it. And so, well, again, we've already talked for an hour.
How do we do it every time?
I mean, I don't even know. I don't even know if I'm so glad that we don't do this over drinks, because this would be, we both would just be out of our minds right now.
Yes, exactly.
Just with talking. So I appreciate you coming on, and like, what a freaking awesome conversation. And for you listening, it's all about cookies. That's what it's going to come down to. The stories that you're telling yourself, are your goals reinforcing the story that is more true than what you've been believing? And are you keeping your eye out for the things that are true because they have been on repetition your entire life, because they're strengths of yours? If somebody's asked you for help the same way, make sure that your ears are dialed to the frequency that is going to move you forward this next year. And so thank you so much for coming on again. I really appreciate you.
I appreciate you.
And remember, if any of this was valuable to you at all, go ahead, leave a rating, subscribe. And as I always say, not because subscribers, not because of that. It's that if you want more people to hear this conversation, that's the rules of the podcast game, my friends. I didn't write the rules. And so you doing that would help out a ton. But in the meantime, this next week, do something to make you proud of you. All right?